Right, hi, thanks for thank you for coming. I think we'll start. I'd like to thank the Religion and Philosophy Department for agreeing for me to speak on this topic. And it was motivated partly after hearing Max talk so well on the definition of atheism a few weeks ago. I thought I might try and follow on from there, especially as he also pointed out that in the 8 years that he's attended the school, that's the first talk in opposition to religion. I think Max was also quite right to say that the absence of a belief in a personal God doesn't imply very much about the believer. People may have various reasons for non-belief, just as there are many such reasons offered for belief. However, while it's very difficult to justify an action with a non-belief, it is very easy to justify an action with a positive belief, especially one that's impossible to prove to be correct. So I'm here today to offer you a particular point of view. Of course, it would be disingenuous if I didn't tell you that I think it's the right view, and it leads to a denial of miracles. So given the time we have, I think I'll spend about 20 minutes trying to derive the claim in my talk, the Scientific Impossibility of Miracles, but that was just a pithy one-liner to get you here, so now you are here. Let me reframe it, and I'll say, to value scientific inquiry requires you to deny the possibility of miracles. Note that my aim is not to disprove claims of particular miracles, but to provide a set of values that are necessary for scientific inquiry, but are inconsistent with the idea of miracles. These values derive from the aims of science and an understanding of the logical limits of what is possible to know. So here's my proposed plan. Let me just add before we start, I'm going to be speaking quite openly about this. So if you think this might be a problem, you're very free to leave. I don't want anybody saying in the discussion bit that you've got offended or something. We'll leave that aside. So I'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then it shouldn't take more than 20 minutes to discredit miracles, and then we'll go to the questions. I should probably start by explaining why I, a physics teacher, have decided to speak about miracles, and it mostly comes from me valuing scientific inquiry and thinking that miracles are not just inconsistent with it, but actually an insult to it. A large number of humans alive today enjoy the consequences of scientific thinking. Our understanding of the human body results in our average lifespan being twice what it was just a few hundred years ago. In this double life that you all will most likely have, you will, if modern medicine is available to help you, be relatively free of pain and disease. Machines have been designed from our understanding of the world to alleviate us from exhausting ourselves on the necessary tasks of survival, and time has been cleared for a large part of our lives to be filled with art, music, literature, poetry, film, and anything else you have time to do or think about. Secondly, though, in a world full of these results of scientific inquiry, this type of thought is necessary, not just for scientists, but also for citizens. Those who don't think this way find the modern world bewildering, isolating, and alienating. The very tools designed to make life easier are seen as mystical, disconnected objects understood by the minority. Superstition, then, is a consequence of people trying to find patterns in the events of their lives, in the absence of an education of basic scientific principles. With an understanding of physics, it's easier, not harder, to comprehend the world around you. Life is simpler, yet richer. Richard Feynman puts it very clearly: the science knowledge only adds to the excitement, the mystery, and the awe. I don't understand how it subtracts. Miracles, in contrast, are supposed events that encourage you to be incurious. They halt all investigation, offering disguised supernatural speculation as explanation. Teaching unknowable claims as obvious truths, I believe, is immoral and a method of controlling an ill-educated population. It has not gone unnoticed by most religions that there is always a constant supply of these sorts of people in the form of children. Miracles are claimed to provide powerful evidence both for God's existence and his concern for the world. But religions claim more than this. They suggest that miracles prove specific claims about God's nature and God's plan. Of course, that all religions do this has left the market rather saturated by the miraculous. Take, for example, the New Testament. This is what the New Testament looks like when you take out all the miraculous. This is called the Jefferson Bible, edited by Thomas Jefferson. It's removed any reference to the supernatural or the miracles. You notice it's a rather slim volume, and the text isn't too small either. Nevertheless, it's no surprise that countries that suffer the greatest from ignorance and poverty are also the most persuaded by these ideas. At the most vulnerable, false hope is offered in the form of an afterlife to those people in return for devotion, effort, and resources that they can scarcely divert from simply trying to stay alive. In addition, the idea of faith healing supplies false hope to those economically isolated from modern medicine. It exploits the ignorant and encourages the willful rejection of available effective treatments. This evil practice has been the cause of unnecessary suffering and countless deaths by exaggerating the stories of the rare survivors. Clerical leaders use miracles as proof for their divine appointed authority. Without this powerful trick, it would be scarcely possible to distinguish them from anybody else except for their strange attire. For example, it has recently been claimed by the Catholic Church that the previous Pope, John Paul II, is conducting miracles from beyond the grave. He is claimed to have cured a nun of Parkinson's disease when she prayed to him shortly after his death. Let me just add as an aside, this is the same Pope who in 1992 was part of a Vatican committee investigating the 1633 trial of Galileo. Interestingly, the present Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger, opposed any change to the Church's position on this matter. However, in 1992, and again more publicly in 2000, John Paul II declared that after 350 years and some serious theological thinking on this matter, the Earth probably does go round the Sun after all. This and other examples lead you to wonder whether the Catholic Church's motto should be, "There's no such thing as too late." But I shouldn't wander away from today's theme. The most recent news for the story is that, unfortunately for the Church and for this nun, her illness seems to have returned. There's your motivation. Now on to the definition of miracles. Obviously, I don't want to argue about definitions and words, so I should be quite clear about what I mean so you are able to criticise what I'm trying to say. I break miracles into 5 categories. I'm going to quickly go through the first 4, that shouldn't take too long, and I want to focus on the last one. They are in order: meaningful events, surprising events, favourable events, rare events, and supernatural events. So we'll start with meaningful events. Our perceptions, in ways not yet fully understood, are dependent on what we know and what we expect. For example, many Christians find patterns of Jesus in ordinary objects with astounding frequency. Notice I'm going to be going through these in decreasing order of absurdity. This is the most absurd one. There are 2 examples. If we are to learn anything from this, it's perhaps that God is a prolific street artist, such as Banksy. What is worth remembering is that only Christians, or those brought up in the tradition, find images of Jesus on ordinary objects. Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus mostly never see images of Jesus, if they've ever heard of him at all. To highlight this, here's another example. Tell me what you see here. If you said cat, you would be correct. It is a cat, but if you were Muslim or you read Arabic, it would be more important to you. This cat supposedly has the word Allah written in Arabic on the side of it. Muslims are rather good at playing this game and seem to find Allah written on the side of almost everything. I spent about 2 or 3 minutes searching the internet for examples, and here are some for your amusement. The Allah plant, the Allah cloud, and even Allah scratched onto the side of the planet. All this seems to show that the natural world contains more shapes that appear similar to Arabic script than to Roman letters. Imagine how busy a religion would be if their word for God was a single vertical straight line. They would see patterns almost everywhere. This sort of pattern hunting is confusion about what you should be looking for. They wrongly try to see patterns between physical observations and human expectations and language. Scientific inquiry compares physical observations with each other. The second, surprising events. I'm not going to spend any time on this at all, except to say, think about the last astonishing thing that you learned that nature could accomplish as a matter of course. This happens to everybody and is a big part of growing up. Our surprise is only measured by our ignorance. Favourable events. So I'm talking about the continued existence of a survivor through another eye's calamitous event, declared often as a miracle. As a contemporary example, last year in October 2010, 33 Chilean miners were rescued after being trapped for more than 69 days, 600 meters underground. A miracle was declared, and there was, and the word was used in the mainstream media with a resonant frequency of nausea for several weeks afterwards. Survivors of this kind are often the double victim of not only a near-death experience but also a religious extortion. They often don't claim it to be a miracle. Against their will, they're hijacked as a marketing campaign for the Almighty. But somehow, however, do declare their escape from danger as a proof of God. To claim God's personal assistance in this matter is to demonstrate a delusional significance that would make even the most pretentious celebrity raise an eyebrow. It's extraordinary that people still put up with this sort of stuff. It's rarely noticed that what really defines these supposed miracles isn't just the survival of the few, but the death of the many. Take the miners example. Around 6,000 people die each year in mining accidents. The intensity of the claim to the miracle is only helped by the knowledge that these people died in some fantastic explosion. And it's only helped by the knowledge that these victims suffered acutely before they died. The observation is uncomfortable, but no less true. Let me add, I'm not encouraging you to say this to the next cancer survivor who declares the Almighty. I'm not in the business of doing this either, but I might point out to them that their doctors helped a little. Rare events. What constitutes a rare event? One might answer if it occurs infrequently. However, we are unable to know about everything that happens in the universe, and our conception of rare, again, is framed by our ignorance. For example, consider supernovae, exploding stars. You might consider them to be rare events. Historical reports of guest stars, bright objects in the sky that weren't there before, suggest that around 10 supernovae have been observed with the unaided eye of humans over the past 2,000 years. So again, you might say a rare event. Modern data and analysis gives an estimate that in a galaxy such as ours, with 100 billion stars, one star explodes on average every 50 years. Again, you might say rare event. You might if you didn't know how many galaxies there were. So after this talk, when you go home, if there's a clear night, hold your hand up to the sky at arm's length and make a hole the size of a 5-pence coin. If we had telescopes good enough, if you had telescopes good enough, you'd be encircling an area that contained 100,000 galaxies. Within that small area, despite supernovae initially seeming a rare event, on any given night, around 5 stars will explode. In the words of the physicist Lawrence Krauss, the universe is big and old, and rare things happen all the time. So those are the 4 I've just ran through very quickly. Notice that those miracles so far are subjective judgments and subjective consequences. They are meaningful, surprising, favourable, or rare to us only. They could also be collected together as extraordinary. Who's to say what's really ordinary, but they count as extraordinary to us. The last definition of a miracle, which is the one I want to spend time on now, is stronger than this. It claims a supernatural event. The difference is as follows. Extraordinary events are the limits of our experience, and supernatural events are beyond it. I'd like to spend a moment now, in order to tackling why a supernatural event is a problem if you're a scientist, the aims, limits, and values of scientific inquiry. I think this is where most debates on miracles goes wrong. They spend a lot of time discussing facts, dwelling on the qualities of witness testimony and so on, and it normally ends up with people talking about what is more probable and weighing the evidence and so forth. I think this makes an assumption about what the world is actually like. To reframe it, in the words of Ludwig Wittgenstein, he says, people keep forgetting to go right down to the foundations. They don't anchor the question mark deep down enough. I think the key to the disagreement isn't about facts or theories, it's about values. To engage in this discussion about what's more probable is not only wasting time, but it's not getting to the heart of the matter. the question shouldn't be what is more probable, but more what is possible to know. Once this has been understood, it's clear then it's not a disagreement about particular events, but it's a disagreement about values. So the aims of scientific inquiry. I tried to think of what would be relevant here, and I came up with this: to find out as many things as possible about the world in order to predict and control it. This could be achieved by simply trying to list everything that happens as it comes in, writing down everything. This is what people do when they're first learning scientists. Scribble down everything they see. And you could do that, but I don't think you'd get very far, because after a while, without even trying, you'd see patterns between the data. And what's much more useful then is to try and come up with some sort of prediction. You could come up with a particular prediction, a singular one. So you could say, this pencil will fall when I let go of it. However, that's not really of any use at all, because in order to test it, I have to drop the pencil. And you could have seen the pencil drop without me saying the prediction. So singular predictions are of absolutely no use to the advancement of scientific inquiry. It's the universal predictions that are the most important. The idea that when anybody drops a pencil, pencils fall. Or when anybody drops objects in particular, they fall. Or when anybody drops an object, it accelerates to the ground with 9.81 meters per second per second. Those sorts of things talk about all objects, and they are universal predictions. That's the aim of scientific inquiry, to look for those. If we saw that that didn't happen one time, we will have learned something, because we would have learned that nature doesn't do what we thought it did, and we could then try and find out what it does do. If it turns out that the pencils do keep dropping, we might take that to be the case, but now I'm going to move on to the next section, so I'm not going to commit to saying we know it's true in light of the next question. So the aim is to look for universal laws, things that apply to the whole universe. Two questions come to mind at this point. We might ask, how do we know that there are rules to the universe at all? And how can we be sure that we have these rules? Well, the first question is one about the universe. The second question is about our relationship with the universe. Now, to the second question, we have an exceptionally good answer, and it's as follows. It is logically impossible to know, to be certain of the truth of, a physical law. We are only able to check a limited number of instances of a pattern that, if it is a universal law, has an unlimited number of possible tests. We are unable to prove a law correct, but one instance that doesn't fit the law will be sufficient to prove it to be incorrect. Let me give you an example. You may have done this. This is Hooke's law, derived by Robert Hooke. The idea that when you place masses that exert forces on springs, they extend by certain amounts. I tried to space these out equally. Albert Einstein used to call physical theories, so these guesses, he used to call them the delicate threads that connect our perceptions. So I've got a thread. So there's the data. See if I can get this right. You might see where this is going. I'll go for the top of the... Oh, that's alright, it's not so bad. I'll try and put that there. Pretty convincing? Alright. So that red piece of thread, that would be our universal law, our guess. It's important to realise that that is a guess. It is logically equivalent to a guess. We haven't proved anything, because we've only made 4 plots on the graph, and we've drawn a line through that makes predictions about an infinite number of points. So we do have an answer to the first question. We have no way of knowing. It is impossible to know whether we have the laws of nature or not. So the answer to the second question answers the first one. If it's impossible to know whether we have the laws of nature, it's impossible to know whether there are indeed laws of nature at all. They might just be handy little summaries that collect together everything that we know about. We have no access to that knowledge. All right, so they're the limits. Another example, so we're not obsessed with the springs. Conservation of energy. Something starts up here, you drop it, falls down there, it's got a certain velocity. When we write out laws like this says this is the pattern between the variables. If you add this up, it's going to be equal to that. So this concept of energy is something that doesn't change over time. It's a pattern, and if it was shown that this didn't add up one time, we would have to accept the conservation of energy was incorrect. Notice I didn't say this happens because of conservation of energy. It's simply the pattern that describes what's happening. Similarly here, this is particle physics. If you're an A-level student, proton goes in, neutron comes out after it collides with an electron, and a neutrino comes out. This sort of thing's been observed all the time. This sort of thing, replacing the neutrino with a neutron, never happens. Why does it not happen? I don't know. But I can give you patterns to describe what does happen, and I could call them the conservation of baryon number, the conservation of lepton number, and so on and so on. So that's the business of physics, to look for patterns and to test them to see if they're wrong. All right, the values then. I noticed the time, I'll hurry up. So, bearing in mind that we have the aim of scientific inquiry, and we have the limits that are imposed by what's possible to know, what values should we derive from this? Well, I'm going to call it to think scientifically. And what I mean by to think scientifically is to hold these values and to stick to them consistently. Many scientists will not meet the requirements I put to you, but what enables them to operate as scientists is that there are these logical limits for what is possible to know, and the practice of their science is shaped by that, even if they're unaware of it. How effectively they operate, though, within these restrictions will depend, among other things, on the awareness of these logical limits. So I've put up a list of values. Assumption of patterns. Like I said, we don't know for sure if there even are laws to the universe. But I think we need to assume that there are. If there's no way to tell that the universe does have laws, a consequence of this is that there is no way to tell that it does not. And given our aims, I think we have no choice but to assume this. Simplicity is also important. I'm going to skip over that. Anti-authoritarianism, vital. I'd put it like this. The only authority in the world is the world itself. If nobody really knows whether the laws of nature are true, you shouldn't take anybody's word for what they say about the world. You should test it yourself and see if their theories are incorrect. Now in practice this isn't always feasible. We only have a finite lifetime, and this inevitably relies on witness testimony and from those we judge to be reliable. But in matters of importance such as this, we follow the principle as closely as possible. Skepticism. You have to doubt what people say. Our rules may be incorrect, and the best way to figure them out is exactly to do that. Rigorously test them and doubt them. The most efficient way to filter out what is incorrect is relentlessly criticizing the present theories, looking for internal inconsistencies, and testing predictions. And lastly, curiosity and imagination. As there's no logical connection between coming up with the guess and the data, curiosity and imagination are vital. Right, so my objection to these supernatural events is as follows. We don't know what the laws of nature are. We have no access to them except through guessing and testing. So I give you an example. Witness testimony, somebody telling you something is true, has almost no value in scientific inquiry because the goal of physics is to search for patterns. As an example, a scientist is confronted with a witness testimony that contradicts a theory that they have. What are their options? Option number one, they take the witness testimony as true and they try and adjust their theory accordingly. Then they try and set up some sort of test to see whether the theory now fits everything that happened before and this new thing that happened. If you're talking about a miracle, they're often claimed to be unrepeatable, and therefore even if you were to do that, it would be totally pointless because you'd never be able to test this apparently miraculous event because you'd have to repeat it in order to do that. That's option number one. Option number two is you reject the witness testimony as being flawed. Maybe they weren't paying attention, they were deluded, they didn't count all the variables up and so on. It's vital to notice that these are the only two options. You can't, as a scientist, just say that was a miracle. Think of it in these terms. Say somebody came to me and told me that Jesus walked on water. What would that be if somebody were to declare that to be a miracle? It would be as follows. I'd be able to write down an equation for gravitational force and buoyancy in terms of volume submerged, density of the fluid, the mass of the person, and so forth. And I could say this works all the time. Nobody's ever shown this to be incorrect, except sometime in 30 AD when Jesus walked on water. This was caused by God. Notice that that is no explanation whatsoever. Right? At the top, we have patterns connecting variables together. At the bottom, we have something that's been cordoned off from curiosity. We've been told not to worry about that one. That's now a miracle. As a scientist, to stay consistent with scientific inquiry, that is impossible to do. So I leave you with the following. Maybe a study of the etymology of the word miracle might help to show the difference. The word miracle derives from miraculum, which translates from the Latin as object of wonder. A person's response to these objects of wonder give a clear distinction between the religious and the scientific point of view. The verb to wonder has two definitions that highlights where the conflicting views differ. Firstly, we have the sense to be filled with admiration, amazement and awe. Now, religious people often report experiences of this kind when encountering supposed miracles. I can't emphasize enough that scientists experience this as well, but they also experience the second definition of to wonder. To think or speculate curiously. For a scientist, the amazement and the curiosity are linked. Investigating the world is at its most exciting when you find something that doesn't fit your expectations. These are the moments when we learn something about the world. In light of the logical limits of knowledge, it will be necessary to reassess what miracle could actually possibly mean. What is being described when somebody claims to have seen a miracle? I put it to you that a miracle in fact says absolutely nothing about the event being described, but more about the person describing. In light of all this, we who value the search for patterns might be wise to redefine the word miracle, and here's what I propose. A miracle describes the event, either genuine, deluded, or reported, that inspired somebody to cease valuing scientific inquiry and to give up trying to learn about the world. It is the unjustifiable claim to be certain of something that is unknowable, namely the claim that the law of nature has been violated. If somebody makes claims to a miracle yet continues to work and think scientifically, perhaps even as a scientist, they do so arbitrarily and inconsistently. Miracles are an insult to the innate human curiosity. To hold the values of scientific inquiry and to do so consistently, you must deny the possibility of miracles. Thank you for listening. All right. Questions? But beforehand, how many people believe in miracles? I should have asked that at the beginning. About 7. Oh, it's about half. About half. Okay. Surely you have some sort of question about it then. Yes?
Why can't you count the actions and power of God as a law within nature that you can consider when assessing a miracle, and therefore when you set all your other laws, such as the rate at which things fall under the force of gravity on Earth, why can't you also add to the law, but this can be broken where the force of God as a law has taken control, and therefore you wouldn't have to break your law because there's always a footnote which is that this can be, and God can therefore be a law in himself, that these laws are true, but then we can't, it's not wrong if God has chosen to act, and that's just a separate law.
Let me give an example. In the early 20th century, people were very concerned about the orbit of Mercury because they were applying Newton's laws of gravitation to the orbits of the planets, and they noticed that the orbit of Mercury didn't fit. There was a little discrepancy between prediction and observation. And I put it to you that under what you said, the inquiry could have halted right there, and we could have said that the laws of gravitation and mechanics are determined by Newtonian mechanics, except for times when God intervenes, and Mercury is such a planet, and it's an exception. Don't worry about that. We've got it all figured out. Right? It could have halted there, but it didn't. Einstein and Eddington, amongst others, spotted this discrepancy, tried to incorporate it into a pattern, and then came up with a general theory of relativity. So I put it to you that if you are to think that, you would have to provide me with a list of variables that constitute this force of God, and then we could incorporate it into the pattern. The claim from earlier in the talk was those sorts of ideas about the force of God and so on are entirely unknowable.
So, but with the Mercury example, they then tried to prove, they then went on to do more investigation to understand it, but it seems that with some miracles that people claim, because they claim it's God, scientists then don't do anything to try and prove it. So Mercury, if someone said, oh, it's fine, it's God, scientists would have thought, oh, well, that's wrong, so we won't do any further investigation.
So let's take an example from the New Testament. Let's take this, right? The amazing fishing statistic that there were no fishes, and then suddenly there were, right? Supposed miracle of Jesus. This is an isolated, singular event. Now, the business of scientific inquiry is to look for patterns. So if I were to somehow try and incorporate this into a law of nature, I would need to be able to test that new law to see whether it was right or wrong. That's my business, as a scientist. That's what we do. The difference in explanation then is that this is decided to be caused by God. And I hope you see the clear difference in the type of explanation. Mine is looking for patterns, and the religious is taking a particular, normally, necessarily unrepeatable event. If it weren't unrepeatable, then they wouldn't have much of a claim, and just simply calling it a miracle. Furthermore, I don't see any connection between this miraculous fishing statistic and proof of God's existence. I certainly don't see any connection between particular aspects of God, and so on.
Might I also sort of chip in on that point where essentially you're making the claim that couldn't you describe God as a law of nature or some sort of force which interacts with this other law and then contravenes it in this case? Well, in which case, okay, you can posit that, but you still have all your work ahead of you, because essentially in your argument you've presupposed the existence of such a God and such a force. You still have to prove all of that first. You can't just say this thing here exists and this is why it's happening. You still have to prove it logically and consistently. Okay, I mean, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'd answer that. Yeah. It's making an assumption about the thing you're trying to prove. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
Mr. Sheils, the New Testament claims that after Jesus had died, he rose again and appeared to many hundreds of witnesses. Can I just hear your response to that? One of you talked about two ways of assessing. One of them was witness testimony. I just wanted to hear how you would respond to that event.
Yeah, okay. As I said, witness testimony has absolutely no value in scientific inquiry, but because nobody has access to the patterns that we're trying to find, that we suppose exist, the laws of nature, then nobody knows better than anybody else, except for that we take on patterns that perhaps we've inherited from our ancestors. We try and rigorously test those, and we keep going until we get closer and closer to the truth. With an event like that, it's difficult to even try and identify which law has been broken. You might, as Sam Harris says, be tempted to say all of them in that particular instance. And it would be very difficult to move on from there. What am I to say? I'm in the business of searching for laws of nature. That thing, I think it manages to survive in modern thought because it's unrepeatable. And I think it's a kind of crack, a philosophical crack that these kind of ideas hide in. And what I'm putting to you isn't that we should be trying to say, I'm going to disprove the witness testimony, or I'm going to claim that the historical record has been altered and it has a very low fidelity. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that this is what scientific inquiry values, the search for patterns and so on. All this other stuff about isolated, unrepeatable events, first of all, is only given to you by witness testimony. No one's ever, I think, in the modern world seriously seen it. For example, there's an Indian, there was an Indian called Sati Sai Baba who claimed to do most of the miracles that Jesus could do. In the modern time, he died last month. There was a 3-day period where people like me were a little uneasy about it, but no, he carried on being dead. And I put it to you, all those miracles that he was performing in India, you never hear about in the newspaper. No one cares about it at all, because it's closer to the present. It's got less credibility. So yeah, I'm sure you'd have a response to that, Ben.
Well, you very politely refused to say that the people were deluded, or the documents have been changed or whatever, which was kind of you. I think there are areas of science where there are individual cases, and we trust them. So we see a supernova, for example, and a specific type of supernova, or we look at we predict the existence of a brown dwarf, and actually no one has ever seen one. So that's an example where we might predict it, but we haven't actually seen one. Do you know what I mean? So I think, in a sense, scientists using peer review, we've got a lot of witnesses to an event. So I think there is a lot of validity in witness testimony, actually, particularly if there's a lot of them who actually, in the case of the New Testament, were still alive when the early documents were written, who we could, if we were reading it, the first editions, could speak to and hear eyewitness testimony. Now, I'm not saying that Jesus' resurrection is a repeatable event, and I would say it does not fit within the realms of science that you're talking about. Of course, it is a miracle, and that's why today's, while a great debate is not the starting point is always going to be an odd one.
Yeah.
But sorry, I'm going around in circles.
No.
But I do think witness testimony is very important. Ask the lawyer.
In response specifically to supernovae, I'd say that there are claims that witness testimony from 1066 or from 1603 of bright lights in the sky are supernovae. Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe are reported to have observed these. I take their witness testimony to be the case, right? Does it matter if they're wrong? No, it doesn't matter if they're wrong. The laws of physics still stand. The laws of nuclear physics, particle physics, general relativity, they all hold whether that event happened or not. Ultimately, it doesn't matter to me. It's a nice story, and I tell it when I teach astronomy. It doesn't matter so much. Does it matter that an event like this occurred? Yes, it does. That would break a rule of nature, and I would need to be able to modify my rule and test it. The difference is between a particular event and a non-repeatable event. Supernovae, exploding stars are occurring all the time, as I just said. We don't happen to see all of them, and we might take someone's word for it. But that doesn't. I think that's a very different thing from a non-repeatable miracle.
Just very last thing, and I'm going to bring it right down lowbrow. This event actually matters more than the supernovae because of the implications for the individual, which the supernovae doesn't have. That's and I speak as a Christian, of course.
Of course. Yes.
Can you also say though that people didn't actually eyewitness Jesus being resurrected, because no one actually saw him get up from the dead? They just saw someone who they thought to be Jesus. Whereas other things in science, we see them and we actually see it happen. Whereas with that, it was a bit more like, is it him? I'm going to say it's him because I want it to be him.
The other thing I would say is on your point of, you said, ask a lawyer about eyewitness testimony. And I think any lawyer worth his salt will tell you that in a court, sort of eyewitness testimony is generally deemed to be one of the least credible pieces of evidence. And a lot of the time it's used to evoke an emotive response in the jury to get a conviction or something.
I would disagree, because without eyewitness statements, you haven't got a case.
DNA evidence that, or fingerprint evidence that someone held a gun and you've then got surveillance cameras photos of them holding it and firing it into someone else. I think you could say, without needing eyewitness testimony, that that person shot another person.
Yeah, but for other
I
things,
think I think I've slightly failed in my aim of this talk, because I was if I'd done it correctly, you wouldn't even be engaging in talk about witness testimony. The point is that even if this event was happening right in front of you, and you saw somebody walk on water, you would either have to accept that you'd seen it and try and incorporate it into a law of nature, or you'd have to say that you've somehow been misinformed. But those are the only two options if you value scientific inquiry. There is no third option to say that it is a miracle, it is an isolated, unrepeatable event that you're going to stop being curious about, you're not going to investigate any further, and just say, God caused it. That was my aim. So all this particular instances of, well, did this happen, can you be sure of that, can you be sure of this? I'd say that's of no interest. Yes?
Could you not sort of call it, well, I don't believe in miracles, but could you not call them sort of anomalies at some point?
How would you decide when an anomaly had occurred? For instance, with the planet Mercury, how would you...
By watching it a lot, like we see that people can't walk on water, so you could say that maybe Jesus just was an anomaly at that point, and just something slightly different was happening that.
We had very low density.
Yeah, well, yes. Again, there are many ways of trying to figure out exactly which law of physics that breaks. Is it the conservation of mass? Is it, blah blah blah. I think that's a very interesting point.
The fish is quite easy for anomaly. Like, could have been a lot of fish there at that random point in time.
Yeah. Again, I think to designate something an anomaly isn't accepting the amount of ignorance that we should accept. That we have a very limited view of the universe. We don't know the laws of nature, and therefore we can't make those claims and be certain of them. All right, I think we've overrun, but thank you all for coming. It's very good of you.